Jacob Nasky. I'm an intern here at the Weinberg Gallery. I helped curate the event that you're seeing around you right now. I was also part of MICFA for a year. Thank you. I just want to welcome you to the Weinberg Newton Gallery. We're a gallery that's focused on social issue events, and we partner with nonprofits every time we have a new gallery. So this time was with MICFA. So I'm going to pass it on to Hannah from the Susan Crown Exchange, and I'm sorry if I butchered your name. I apologize.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Haviland Rummel with the Susan Crown Exchange. I just want to thank everyone for attending this afternoon's panel, Youth Power Equals Stronger Identity, Stronger Social and Emotional Learning Skills. I also want to thank the Weinberg Newton Gallery for hosting us today in this space, and also for hosting the Bold Disobedience exhibition all summer long. And we encourage you to kind of take a look at the art here and in the next area over after the panel. So our work at SCE really focuses on helping the rising generation develop skills they need to thrive in the 21st century. And we focus primarily on social and emotional learning because we see this growing importance of skills like empathy, resilience, teamwork, problem solving as being really crucial to helping youth and adults respond to kind of the changing world today and going forward. We also see the importance of SEL as a means to help develop youth voice. And I'm honored to have learned from and work with a number of the panelists today. Youth on Board, MICFA Challenge, Kuumba Links, and Robert Sherman are exemplars really in developing programs that focus on youth voice and in creating learning environments that really promote this type of learning. So I'm honored to be part of this today. I'm going to hand it over to Michelle, who's the CEO of MICFA Challenge. MICFA has been around for 20 years now, serving nearly 4,000 youth annually through Action Civics. And please join me in welcoming Michelle, a real leader in the youth development field here in Chicago.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. We're incredibly excited. MICFA doesn't usually host panel discussions, so this is kind of a first time for us. We were actually we were challenged by the gallery staff. One of the partnership, one of the things you have to do when you partner with the galleries, you have to do the programming throughout the gallery exhibit. They want people to come into the space to not only learn about the work that you do, but see the art. And so we had to come up with different things to do, which is not normally, we don't normally do this type of stuff. And so I'm excited of the panelists, of the topic we're talking about today, which is, I think, is something when we're talking about adolescent youth, particularly in Chicago, often the way that they're portrayed, the way that they're demonized, the narratives that surround adolescent youth, particularly adolescent youth of color, really in Chicago always focuses on the violence issue. And rarely do we ever talk about brain development, right? You never hear that when it comes to teenagers. Rarely do we talk about also the best practices that youth development nonprofits should be focusing on to really take advantage of that really wonderful time in their brain development. So anyways, our panelists will talk more about that. So let me introduce everyone. So right here is Jenny Sazama. So Jenny, I will say, is like an inspiration to MICFA Challenge. Most people know about MICFA that we do youth councils. That actually came from Youth on Board. We were trained by Youth on Board to be able to do that model here in Chicago. So they were the first ones. So we're super appreciative of that. So Jenny is the director and co-founder of Youth on Board, which is located in Boston, and is a nationally recognized leader in the youth organizing and social emotional learning fields. She has spearheaded successful youth engagement efforts and trains both nationally and internationally. Her work is based on the idea that building strong relationships is the key to effecting real change, and that the belief that everyone benefits when young people have a say in the institutions and policies that affect them. Jenny developed YOB's action and support model, which pairs organizing with social and emotional support. In fact, if you pick up a Thrive booklet in the back, they're actually featured in that booklet. Working closely with the Boston Public Schools, Jenny co-administers the Boston Advisory Council and a group of elected student leaders that seeks to influence policy on the school district and national level. So thank you, Jenny, for coming today. Dr. Robert Sherman is a PhD and works as a consultant to foundations and nonprofits in the areas of education reform, youth development, leadership, and civic engagement and arts education. His particular interest is in bringing isolated yet related perspectives and favored strategies into productive alignment for greater impact. Sherman was appointed the Senior Fellow at the Stewart Foundation for 2016-2017, where he was helping to refine strategies around whole child education, arts integration, and social emotional learning. And then Kiela McNair is with Kumba Links. She was born and raised in Chicago and has always been interested in art making and the impact it has had on different folks. She's an artist, poet, dancer, and actress, as well as an activist. In 2008, she joined Kumba Links and is now the operations manager there. So if we can welcome our panelists. So what we're going to do is Robert's going to lead us off with a little sort of presentation around adolescent brain development and all that jazz.
Yeah, adolescent brain development and all that jazz. I am so thrilled to be in this room with old friends and new friends. I've had the pleasure of working alongside Youth on Board and MICFA Challenge for, well, a decade and a half each, maybe even longer. So for me, it's thrilling to see how the fields are coming together and advancing. Also really proud to be here with the Susan Crown Exchange, which is doing, I think, very groundbreaking work on the social and emotional learning world and adolescence. So I have a sort of ridiculous task in less than 15 minutes that I've taken one of up already, to summarize a lot of very technical information about brain development and adolescent development. And I hope that I'm not going to give a wonky talk. It could get wonky, but I'm going to try and stay really at a high level. I'm going to blast through very complicated concepts and hopefully build a somewhat coherent picture. So our understanding of adolescence has really advanced tremendously, and our thinking about it, in large part because of brain imaging and studies that have been done by neuroscience. We just understand adolescence a lot better. Motivation science stands alongside neuroscience, and it's another piece of what we're developing and understanding in the learning sciences. And it's sort of how is it that some young people really get strong motivation to persist, to complete, to grow and develop? It's very important. And the frame for all of this really is the 3 R's. And this is the big boil down around which much of what I'm going to say revolves. The 3 R's are relationships, rigor, and relevance. And I'm going to return to all of them in different places. They relate to social and emotional learning. They relate to how the brain develops in adolescence. And they're really the keys to a lot of understanding. At the end of this 15 minutes, which I better get my clock going, at the end of it, I'm going to talk a little bit about how this relates to civic engagement and creativity. So just to take a big step back and say what's going on in adolescence, I don't think we should forget as we go into this conversation that adolescence has a lot of tasks. And they've been studied very rigorously since the 1950s. Here are some of the things that adolescents really need to work on and understand. Adolescents need to adjust to a new physical self. I'm going to say some very obvious things, but they set a backdrop. They need to adjust to a new physical self and integrate that into a sense of self. They need to adjust to exploding intellectual abilities. Advances in the brain allow conceptual thinking and abstract thinking and all of that great idealism that surges in adolescence. That's all new, and it's new abilities that need to be tamed and structured. Developing a sense of identity becomes really among the core adolescent tasks. Who am I? Am I consistent across different environments? Or how am I different? How do I understand it? Setting up adult vocational goals, having a sense of being a working person in the world or how one's going to spend one's time. It's a time where relationships to parents and adults get very deeply and completely restructured. And for those of us who are parents who've lived through this, it's pretty amazing to experience it. But the task of adolescence is to reshape relationships with adults away from a hyper-dependence to a much more autonomous and autonomy orientation but also then to turn to peers in ways that are more powerful. We're going to talk a lot about that. You have to manage sexuality, have to establish a personal value system, you have to develop impulse control for all those impulses. So adolescence, really, if you look at the picture, we could talk about what civic action is, but people are really working on multiple things, young people. And there's some very good work done by Todd Rose out of Harvard, very interesting book called The End of Average, talks about how actually development is jagged, and neuroscience very much picks this up, meaning not everything develops at the same pace. So thinking or some kind of emotional explosion might happen first. What's going to catch up? So we've all been with adolescence, and this is what it looks like, and this is what it feels like. It's unpredictable, it's very variable, and a lot of this really has to do with the nature of brain development in that time. So there's great thinking going on in addition to the neuroscience about human development. Some of the best of it here in Chicago at the Chicago Consortium on School Reform, whose work on integrated identities has really put this into place. And the Chicago Consortium, in its work on foundations of young adult success, says that these are the foundational components that a young person is working towards. Self-regulation, developing, so that means managing your emotions, maintaining focus, responding across a different range of activities and environments. Knowledge, you got to learn a lot of facts to function in the adult world. We don't think about that. I guess teachers in school think about that, but I think mostly we're not focused on what the facts and knowledge that young people need. Mindsets. This is a time where your attitudes about yourself and understanding of yourself really need to come into productive focus. You need to know and honestly assess your capacity, but hopefully believe that you can grow and develop. So called growth mindset. We could go down that rabbit hole for a session. And then values. And then the key factors we're going to talk about a lot and have examples of: agency, becoming effective, having competencies, the whole set of ways to meet different demands, and then an integrated identity. I said this before, but I want to return to it. It's a sense that you are the same person across a whole range of different places that you go. So I could describe all of these things in the usual social and emotional learning terms, the big Castle Five. Many of you in this room I know are familiar with. So really, a lot of this is working on self-awareness and self-regulation, awareness of others, and relationship skills, and then responsible decision-making. That's the social and emotional language, but we could use many kinds of language around this. So adolescents look disorganized, and they are. Why? Because the beginning of adolescence marks a huge explosion in the brain, development of a massive new onslaught of synapses and synaptic connections and brain cells, and we could go technical, but I don't want to get all that wonky. There's a brain explosion, and there's all of this new material in the brain. It's not organized yet, and this is what we see, particularly in early adolescence. So what is adolescence about? It's about pruning down those brain cells and organizing them into patterns of thinking, patterns of feeling. And what neuroscience is showing us is that, in fact, that pruning happens in relationships. Relationships and emotion drive the pruning. So the brain is organized around what's personally meaningful. And what's personally meaningful in adolescence is what's experienced in relationships with adults and increasingly with peers. So it's almost as if there's a map inside your head that needs to become coherent. You need to know the highways need to establish themselves, the main ways that you think and feel and get where you're going that become reliable over time to get to your destination. The side roads, and that's what's going on during adolescence. It's called synaptic pruning. It's very technical, but the conclusion is that it's actually relationships that make this happen. The other, another aspect of brain development is that the brain is pleasure seeking. It's dopamine seeking. So dopamine, one of the chemicals that the brain produces, is a driver of adolescent behavior. And what is it that excites an adolescent? Well, novelty seeking, turns out, risk taking. All of those elements of newness, risk, these are rewarded in the brain. So is developing a sense of capability and capacity, of agency, and so is developing your voice. All of these actually attach to the pleasure centers, and development drives towards them. So that is a very short and inadequate tour of a very complex subject. But a neuroscientist named Dan Siegel wrote a book that I recommend to you all called Brainstorm. Came out, I think, in 2014. And in it, he organizes this to say, well, if we know that all of this brain development is happening and there's great disorganization and the intellectual abilities of, let me say one more thing of context around the brain development. Interestingly, the first part to develop of the adolescent brain is the limbic brain. It's actually the reptilian, animal, emotional side develops first. The last thing to develop is the prefrontal cortex, which is thinking and reason. And so if you have a young adolescent at home and you're really thinking, well, why can't you think this out? And it's so logical and it's so obvious. Well, the prefrontal cortex hasn't caught up with the limbic system, which actually is ruling the day, and the highways haven't been constructed yet, so there actually is no way that organized thinking would come into focus. So Dan Siegel, in this book Brainstorm, talks about what it is that really can be profitably focused on for adolescents to really help them develop. And he created a little acronym of ESSENCE. So ES, emotional spark, that the passions and personal interests, the drive through relationships, the sparks that we see, those need nurturing and they need adult and peer attention. Pay attention to the emotional spark and nurture interest, because what sparks for the young person really can become some of that organizing the highways inside both thinking and feeling. So ESSENCE, ES, next, SE, social engagement. Come to understand that peers are going to become key in this process, and that social engagement and sort of settling in and peer-focused work and those relationships, promote it. Don't resist it, promote it, because it's really actually going to be the keys to the kingdom for getting organized. N, novelty. Novelty is a physical addiction in adolescence. And it's very hard, I think it's hard for schools to continually promote novel experiences. I know that nonprofits look to find a way, and then the CE of ESSENCE is creative exploration. Adolescents naturally push against the status quo. So there are some neuroscientists that have challenged the concept of raging hormones. It's very easy to say raging hormones, and that they actually describe instead rising hormones. And they say that this style of brain development, the hormonal explosions, all of the chaos, in fact, serves two very important functions. One is it helps adolescents separate and leave the nest. It actually creates the conditions where autonomy and independence and annoyance and chaos, it becomes right that, well, okay, going to a more peer orientation. The second thing is that it generates, because of the novelty side of this and the creative exploration, it generates a lot of out-of-the-box thinking. And for some subset of our population, they become out-of-the-box thinkers. And so the neuroscientists are saying it's actually evolutionarily useful that we have a stage of life where out-of-the-box thinking really can develop and flower, because we need out-of-the-box thinkers to push us on to the next step. It won't be everybody, but it's going to be a subset, and adolescence is the time when that happens. I know from my work with lots of community-based nonprofits, this is a treasure. This is a treasure that is cultivatable. So, rigor, relationships, and relevance. Relevance to the person, first and foremost, the primacy of relationships, and then the rigor of the process, the good attention to these essence pieces. That's what helps with brain integration. So how does it relate? Then just turning really to two different strands. One, creativity, and the other, civic engagement. Why would civic action and civic engagement have such great power for an adolescent? Well, given what I've said already, there are lots of reasons. Civic action is highly relevant, and young people involved in civic change work sort of understand that it's their goals to change their communities, to improve their schools, to work on a policy, to clean up a park, whatever it is, it's relevant to them, and relevance is a driver. It's peer relational. This work almost always is done in groups where the opportunity to really do that peer learning, and it refocuses, in a lot of cases, with mentor adults, somebody like a Jenny, who really is able to be a meaningful adult, but who's promoting the peer side of it. This is really critically important in helping adolescents manage that process of reshaping their relationships to adults and really deepening with peers. The challenge and novelty, the opportunities to engage in civic action really are different than what is offered to young people generally in their schools or coming up. It's novel, it's interesting, and it's values focused. So it keys right into that part of identity development that really is about honing your own values and pulling them together. Similarly with creativity, creativity shows, or arts expression, or we could call it any number of things, also adds tremendously in filling out this picture. Creativity and work in the arts really demonstrates that problems have more than one solution. There isn't a single answer. You can go at the task in multiple ways. Beauty comes in many different forms. That there are multiple perspectives, that the perception of what you've heard or what you see is that there are multiple perspectives and that they're each valuable. There are there's just the piece of understanding. Well, let me just switch points. Another piece on the creativity is that it brings thinking and feeling together in new ways. So very much the goals of an effective social and emotional learning, it brings that integration. And then a last point, someone wrote this as children learn poetic capacities. That is, that words connect to feelings, And that becomes a very important in communication. So I'm going to stop there.
That's great.
And I just hope that I've set a little bit of context about what some of the tasks are. Here are the experts sitting on either side of me who actually are practitioners helping young people along their paths. But I think that we know a lot about the challenges, and it's just about stepping up and stepping into doing more of it better.
Thank you, Robert. Quick housekeeping note, we may go a little over 5 p.m. Hope that's okay. I hope people can stay until 6. We have the space for networking. We want people to view the art exhibit. We have refreshments in the back. So just want to make sure people don't skedaddle immediately after the panel discussion. So, Jenny, can you tell us a little bit of what Youth on Board does, its history, and the model of programming that you've created and utilize in Boston?
So when Michelle first called me and asked me if we wanted to be on this panel, I loved that we were finally connecting the social emotional learning piece with the action civics and talking about teenagers as people and as humans. What Youth on Board has is an action and support model. We sort of did our own informal study. We didn't go through Harvard or even BU in Boston, but we looked around and we tried to have young people be organizers, and we said we need to go have them really have a sense of themselves and go do civics and change policies in their lives. And what we saw was that there was a whole emotional support piece that was needed in order to actually have this picture be complete. There's youth development organizations and social emotional learning pieces, and then there's organizing and civics. And I think the two absolutely have to be together. One of the base premises that I loved listening to you, Robert, I always love listening to you, but one of the base premises that we come forward with is that teenagers are incredible. They're really, really incredible human beings. They're warm and creative and hopeful, and they make lots of noises like they're not hopeful, but they're far more hopeful than we are. And they show us things, and they have high expectations of us, and they're deeply disappointed in us. And they feel like they're invincible. And it scares us, and we want to tell them they're not. But what a good quality to feel like you're invincible. What a wonderful thing to walk into the world and feel like you can do anything, right? So how do we have young people, how do we take that in young people and give them the support that they need to turn that in the direction that can be, and give them the power? It's normal human nature to want power. It's normal to not want bad power, but to feel powerful, to feel like you're a worthwhile human being. It's normal human nature to feel like we care about each other and care about our environment. Teenagers are probably, I think, the most misunderstood and most openly disliked group in our society. People, you can sit at a bus stop and just have people have open conversations about how bad teenagers are and not have anybody think anything of it. It's just commonplace. And the reason that we feel, they don't do what we want them to do, and we don't know how to, I don't know how many people here are parents, right? And how many people here are parents of teenagers or older? So you've lived through that stage. I've been working with young people for 30 years, shows my age, and I now have a 16-year-old son, and it is totally different being a parent of a teenager than, my husband also runs a big youth program, and he's just trying to explain to our son, but we're the cool parents. We're the cool people, and it's like, but you're my parents, right? So the teenagers are trying things, they're pushing on us, they're wanting us to leave, they're wanting us to stay, they're wanting to try their own thinking. So what we try to do at Youth on Board is have young people come in, talk about what they want to have change in their society, what Robert was talking about relevance. What's happening in your school? What's happening in your life? What would you like to actually have be different in your life? And then how do we support you to make that happen? And that means supporting your whole life. That means we're not expecting you to walk into the program and not having had a huge fight with a friend or your parent, or had one of your friends get murdered yesterday, or whatever was going on in your life. We don't expect you to skip over any of that. So we do the two pieces together. And so I'm going to just tell a story about one young person that is an alumni staff with us, and Harvard just did a study on our program, and she just got to write up her whole study. And she came to us after she'd gotten suspended 12 times. 12 times she said, "I'm done. I need to know what my rights are." And she happened to come to us at a time that we were in the middle of changing the Massachusetts state law. We now have something called Chapter 222, and we've taken all code of conducts in Massachusetts and changed them from gotcha code of conduct, zero tolerance code of conducts, to healing code of conducts that have restorative justice all in them. It's not perfect, but we did it, right? So she came to us at a time that she was trying to figure out what her rights were, and she was really mad. And she knew that things weren't happening in her life the way that they should be. And we said, it's okay to be mad. It's okay. You can be really mad. It's not right. Your life is not right. Racism is horrible. Sexism is horrible. Adultism is horrible. It is okay to be really mad. But let's figure out how to be mad and actually change something. So that's what we try to do, is like leave room for the feelings and the healing and get behind people to actually have them figure out how to change policies. She also was one of the young people that got to design our app, which there's some papers in the back. It's bostonstudentrights.org, and we're trying to get all districts in the country to have students develop a similar app. And it is all the policies that we've passed for the past 20 years. Students can go on their phones, and teachers and parents can go on their phones. We've had 1,300 downloads now, as of last week. And you can go on and actually see what your rights are. And students developed that. And they developed that because they were mad, and we let them be mad, and we let them talk about how mad they were, and then help them figure out how to change things. So.
Nice. Thank you. Kiela, I feel like I keep massacring your name. Kiela. Okay. Kiela is an alum, actually, of Kumba Links' programs, and she now works there. So can you tell us a little bit about what Kumba Links does, and what was it about their program that enticed you as a youth, and what you loved about it?
First of all, thank you so much for letting me be here. I had a little coffee, so if I talk a little fast, it's okay. Keep up with me. So Kumba Links is a hip-hop arts programming organization founded by 3 women in 1996, and we are housed in Uptown. And so it's all about taking the art and the elements of hip-hop plus knowledge of self, and how do you combat what's happening in school, in your homes, in your neighborhoods, and how do you speak on it without breaking, but healing. And so that's like the shortest that I could get with it, so I'm just gonna leave it there. And so what I really loved about the program, I was in the teen angst phase, and so I was at the point where my parents were like, what is wrong with you? What is happening? And I didn't feel like they were the appropriate people to talk to about what was happening in my life. Really odd, right? And so they brought me to this program called Kumba Links. They had heard it because a couple of my friends were in the program. And so I went there, and I was like, oh, this is an after school program? No. I'm not a child, you know? No. And then I went up and talked to Jacinda and Jaquanda, who are the co-directors right now, and I remember this like it was yesterday. They were like, hey, baby, how are you doing? Blah, 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 blah. Introduce ourselves, and then they go, what do you want to do? What? You're not just going to put me in a room and tell me to sit down and do whatever's happening in that room? And so I was very confused at that moment. I was like, what do you do? What can I do? And they were like, you can go into each one of these rooms and figure out what you want to do, step out, go to the next one, and you can roam around and do whatever you want to do, whatever type of art form that you want to do. And I was like, oh, crap. I like everything in every one of these rooms. And they were like, well, you're here every single day, so switch every single day. And so that's what really brought me into the program, was like this place where they asked me what I want to do.
Yeah, I find that interesting. We experience that at MICVA. Students often come in and they're like, no one's ever asked me what I think. which is really sad, actually, if you think about it. So Jenny and Kayla, for the both of you, when youth come to your programs, sort of what identity have they crafted for themselves, right? Or what you've noticed? And what does your program do to help further sort of that identity development, the integrated identities that sort of Robert was speaking to?
You want to start? You go? Okay. What we want every human being to come out with is an identity that you're actually really powerful, worthwhile, wonderful human being, because that is who we are. That is actually who we are. So we want young people to have that be sort of the goal. So what we do to help young people come up with that identity is, I think, similar to what you were talking about, is we ask young people what they think. And many young people have not been asked what they think ever. We have this 10-time rule. So the first time young people come into our program, we ask them what they think 10 times in 10 different ways before we actually accept that they don't know. Because they're just so not used to anybody ever actually asking them what they think. So we ask them what they think, and we ask them what they want to change, and then we give them, and then the adults set up opportunities to help them figure out how to do that. So another story is another alumni staff. We have this alumni pipeline, and another alumni staff named Carlos came into our program. He came in because there were budget cuts in his school, and some of his favorite teachers were getting cut. And he said he wanted to know what he could do. Felt frustrated with it. So he very quickly got attached to got involved in leading some of the equal time listening. And became a youth leader of, we do, every other week we do equal time listening groups. That's just part of your job. You come and it's not about work, and it's just about healing time. It's just about talking about how are you today? How's your relationship with your parents today? And it's peer listening. It's not adults sitting taking notes and saying, how can we help you? It's really just giving, there's two adults in the room, and we give the young people a chance to just talk to each other. It is incredible. I don't think any of us get a chance to do that very often. Most of us don't have people that just actually listen to us in a real way. So we have people do so Carlos was interested in doing more of the equal time listening, so he started getting a group of young people to lead the equal time listening groups. What happened after the election was that he's very close to a lot of the immigrant young people, and the level of hate crimes in our city, I think probably in most cities, there was all of a sudden permission to come out with all of these things that were underground. And he and people that he'd been doing this work with got very scared. And he said, this is what we need to do. We need to take what we've been doing at Youth on Board for years around this equal time listening, and we go and do these trainings nationally, internationally, and actually build a program around it. We need to have people that are from very different backgrounds that actually want the same thing. People want the same thing. We all want enough to eat. We all want a good home for our children. As children, we want safe places to be. We want a good education. We need to get the people that want the same thing to actually start listening to each other, because they're not so far from each other. So him and a group of alumni have started developing this program that we're calling the Open Doors Project. So it's been him actually taking this and knowing that he is enough of himself to be, that he's worth it, and that we're going to follow him. And now I'm running around trying to fundraise for this program that he has taken what we've been doing for years and developed it into a program, and it's just gorgeous. So, yeah.
Okay, I had to read the question again. So I would say once our youth come into the program, they definitely already have an identity for themselves, and they already have the best sense of style. First off, like I'm always like, where'd you get that? Oh, you want to go thrift store shopping together? Because we all broke. It's really great to like just sit down and have a conversation with them, because it's more along the lines of like, what do you want to do? And they're like, well, let me tell you about myself. And that's them. That is the essence of them. Like, I want someone to listen to me. And I want to come into a program where I am respected. And so I have a hard time with thinking that I help to develop their identity, because I think that they come in with it and they just need help to voice that. And so that's what I think that we do, is we're like asking those questions, like, So how does that make you? I know. How does that make you feel? Like, what is the trigger in that sentence? Is there something? Is there a value in there that somebody crossed? You know, is there something that happened? Was there a relationship that was broken? Or, you know, asking those questions, and then they have their own voice to say, this is what I need. This is my identity, and this is why I'm here. And that, I think, is great. It's just like them being able to like shut us down when we're talking and be like, no, this is what we need, and this is why we need it. That's great.
So Robert, when we hear of brain development, or at least when I hear of brain development, it's usually only in reference to pre-K, right? So small children, pre-K, toddlers, early elementary. You often hear the best practices that have to be in place to sort of capitalize on that brain development, to set that youth on a path of success. Parents are even being trained, right, on best practices to utilize at home, elementary school teachers. But you don't hear that when it comes to teens. And often, I can speak for myself, I often get into discussions with people where they see programs that focus on adolescents as intervention programs. And they sort of feel like, well, if the brain development, or if the best practices did not happen in the early stages of life, almost like it's a lost cause at this point. I have been in rooms with things like that. I actually was in a room where people said, well, is this just a lost generation that we just basically say, well, and disinvest in, and just simply reinvest more dollars into early childhood? So I've been in those spaces. Can you respond to that? Can you? And hopefully debunk that.
I can respond to that, and I think that there are lots of beliefs about lost causes, and I think that we have in our head lots of sort of structural, cultural messages and understandings of who's on top and who's in the middle and who's on the bottom, and that these are all very fixed and they're hard to work through. And a lot of the healing that I think is being described here is about finding ways to address those very deep structures around race and race and class and all of these different variables. In terms of brain development, the news is really good. It turns out that this second explosion is a second great opportunity. Now, if you want to quantify, are there more brain cells produced in early childhood or in adolescence, I don't know who could answer that question. Probably more in early childhood because it's just starting out. But it's a great second opportunity, and they used to believe that brain cells could not regenerate. New information now is out there that the brain does, in fact, regenerate. It used to be that we thought that people had fixed characters, that they had traits that they carried that they were kind of stuck with. We're kind of learning now that actually it's probably stronger to think about skills than traits, that traits are about evaluating and thumbs downing, usually, more than they are thumbs upping anybody. But the news is good. The brain is plastic. Its plasticity lasts much longer. And in fact, they say that this neurosculpting that goes on, all of this synaptic pruning, goes on well into late 20s in some way, shape, or form, even though the bulk of it gets done during frank adolescence. So it's a hopeful message. I just want to emphasize lift up one piece. I think the question that this panel is asking is, what are the pathways to actually do this best? What are the structures that a young person would need to encounter? Available programs, a way that a school might function that in fact would facilitate this kind of healing is one word, development might be another. And I really want to argue that the access to creativity as one set of strategies and a focus on on civic life and the civic world. These are two very powerful, under-recognized strands in general culture. And on the civic engagement side, people really care about their life circumstances. They care how they feel. They care about their park or not having enough money to get on the bus, or how their school isn't as good, or any number of other policies. That people care about this stuff. It's relevant to them. So rather than abstract tasks that would promote development and better thinking, the opportunity to actually harness creativity or really focus on what is important, but nobody ever asked. Nobody ever asked me if I was interested in that or what I was interested in. And I think the programs like these are shining a light to say, gosh, we could get much better development, much better. We could promote our, sort of foundation folks, the fancy conclusion would be, we could build democracy in this way. We could actually have people who are able to talk to each other and can actually listen. Well, don't we need that focus? I mean, has anybody turned on the television recently? Don't we need this? I'd say yes. And so this kind of work is highly relevant for that too, for that big picture.
Can I say a quick thing? I just wanted to just give a quick shout out to Susan Crown's to the Susan Crown Exchange. They just we were just part of this project to write the book that's in the back, and it was the first time in all of the years of running Youth on Board that I've actually gotten a grant and backing to really focus on the social emotional learning piece of the work, and that's something that a lot of arts programs, action, organizing programs, civic action programs that we do all the time anyways. That's what we do. If you see a good program, you can pretty much be sure that the young people are supported in some real way. Some of us have big systems set up, and some of us just have people that work really late at night and are have people over at their house doing college applications and listening on the phone when they cry and talking them out of fights with whoever. But that it was the first time that I felt really that we were able to really write down all of the systems in a really systematic way and write it up so you could read it. So I just think that work is, like you said, it's the civic work is totally undervalued, and the social emotional learning work is starting to become more of a field, but it's something that a lot of youth organizations have been doing for years. So
just to the question that's hanging
Yeah.
from that is,
What do you do?
how then do we broaden this and make it much more available to a wider swath? And it will lead us inevitably to ask the question, how can schools get in on this in a different way than they are now? Because nonprofit, outside of school, it's not going to touch everybody, and this shouldn't be an after-school only set of opportunities. This is what young people need to develop and thrive. So, how can we actually begin to change the broader systems? That question hangs very heavily, and a number of us in this room are working hard on that.
but the young people know the answers.
Yes.
We need to ask them.
And actually, I wanted to end with this question, and then we're going to open up to questions from the audience. I will say, too, if you can stick around, the panelists will be here, so you'll have time to even approach them and talk to them, once we're done with the panel as well. So adultism, our favorite word, right?
Yep.
As adults, we rarely believe or understand that we carry the adultism gene and disease and utilize it frequently. And how detrimental that is for youth. So I don't know what I'm trying to ask here, but if you guys can kind of speak on that a little bit, because I always want to kind of remind people of how bad adultism is.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, so half the time I feel like half the time I feel like I'm part of the youth because I'm 25, so I'm still developing myself, and so that's one point that I would also make. Development does not stop after 18. Like, these programs need to continue after you turn 18 because they don't know everything. Surprise. But I have to catch myself a lot in those moments where I'm like, just do it because it'll help you in the long run. And then I'm like, no, sit down and have a conversation with them about whether they actually want to do this, about what will it take to do this. And it's those like extra 10 minutes that people just don't want to have of a conversation. And I think that it's really hard to check yourself in those moments because you're like, I'm this figure that they're supposed to look up to and blah, 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 but you're also like this person that they're supposed to look up to and be able to trust. And so you're not supposed to say, just do it because I said so. You're supposed to say, this is going to help you or it won't help you, and I just want you to try it out.
So adultism is huge and real, and we mostly normalize it and think that it's just training young people. It's the basis to young people. When things get tighter and harder in society, things get really hard in young people's lives. Child abuse, young people being treated very badly in homes, and I do not blame parents. It's things are really hard out there, and it comes out on the smallest people, and it's allowed because adultism and racism and many other isms exist. I think that adultism is something that we need to look really deeply at ourselves and not blame ourselves for. But I would just echo what you said, is that if you stop and listen and you don't talk, most of what you were thinking was really important to have said will get said. And the young people will come to really incredible conclusions that if you actually stop and listen to them and leave them room to figure things out for themselves and help do some guidance, it makes a huge difference. I could talk for hours about adultism, but I think that it's something that I love that you brought that up.
I usually try. Okay, we're going to open it up for questions. Probably about 5 minutes or so of questions from the audience. If I could please ask you to ask a question, not to kind of stand up on a soapbox. And even though MCFA loves soapboxes, but please. So yeah, and I don't know. Well, we're filming, so we don't have a mic, but we'll figure it out. Okay.
Curious Balance with Chase 23 Empowerment Group, so we do a lot of work with young men of color on the south side of Chicago, ages 13 to 18. So I hear about this idea about identity and adultism, and so I'm at this space where I don't want to force my identity on the young people to where that makes them feel inferior or makes them feel that how they feel or how they identify isn't important. But my question is, how do you go about challenging identity?
Yep, that's right.
Young black men in Chicago are
That's
really
right.
bought into this narrative of criminal mentality, of less than, of the bottom feeder. This is a very ingrained mentality, despite when they see someone who looks totally like them. How do I challenge identity? How do I say, yeah, this is kind of what you see and this is what you've been brought into, but I want to encourage you to maybe expound on that more.
Yep.
So challenging identity without necessarily forcing.
I always start with affirmations. Affirmations like how amazing they are. Like, you are beautiful. You are a beautiful black young man, but that's very general. But then because I have that problem too with youth, especially when it comes to like toxic masculinity. Because I'm that person where I'm like, stop it now, but I'm also like, this is a teachable moment, and so it is those questions of asking those questions. And sometimes they'll pop into your head immediately, and sometimes you'll be in bed and you'll like wake up, write it down. The next day you'll ask the question. But it is those questions about like just generalizing it too. Like what would you think about a situation like this if you were in like if it came to a situation where it was a woman getting catcalled on the street, for example, what would you feel like if you were getting catcalled? Wouldn't you feel a little embarrassed that some dude's walking past you screaming at you? Like just putting them in that situation and humanizing that situation and saying like, this could be you. And like, how do we make sure it's not you?
A few things. One is that I think it's also adultism to hold back on what you think, right? So I think saying to them, I care about you and I want you to think differently about yourself, right? Like saying that straight out, which sounds like what you already do, right? I think so it's one is not holding back on what we know, but listening much more than we're comfortable with. And letting them make mistakes, but not letting them fall on their face so badly, like not just watching mistakes happen, but being okay with mistakes happening around. Sometimes we don't want them to make any mistakes, but we have to let them try things that we know. Sometimes I think they're not going to work, and they do, right? Like I'm sure that they're never going to do this thing, and they do. But so I think those are the three key things, but I think the question you're asking is the hardest question for everybody that works with teenagers. It is like, it is the lifelong, I practice that exact question like every day, that balance of being an adult, having information they don't have, knowing that I'm covered with adultism and I think I know better than them, and letting them be themselves. It's really, really tricky. So that, we could just get smarter.
Well, I agree with all of those perspectives, but I'd add another layer to it, which is that identity, like many other features, can become a matter of choice as opposed to an automatic. So where this line of thinking leads me is, where is the critical analysis that can be offered? Where's the understanding of the system in which people come up, of how they got to their beliefs, that then allows, that is highly emotional and really charged, that then might allow choice. And again, I think often we see identity as fixed. It's almost like a trait, and it's there, and that's what it is, as opposed to you could actually choose an identity based on what you understand and what you want and what you aspire to, and sort of who you feel you are, peeling away the other. So I think there's a lot of critical analysis, and in my book, critical political analysis that comes into the middle of this. And I think that offering some, or aiming to offer some choice, choose it, as opposed to have it be automatic, is a way to go.
Really quick, one of the things we do at MICFA is we do values exercises. Often youth have never been asked what their values are or what they value, and really getting them to hone it down to like 2 to 3, which is really hard. And then from there, you can even have a deeper discussion. Well, if you value family, then what does that mean, right? You could use that as an exercise around the identity issue. And if their identity or their construct is in direct conflict with their values, and that can open up a much deeper conversation, right? So one more question, because I do want to honor people's time and we have appetizers and stuff like that. Alicia?
Yeah, I'm Alicia Tate with Chicago Foundation for Women. So it's sort of a two-parter. I'll make it quick. We just talked about young men. I'm wondering if you could say something about young women, because I think so often we don't even question the sort of roles that young women fall into in our communities and our families. So how do you reach young women, and sort of what are some of the strategies you use to address, helping them find their power as young women? And the second part of it is kind of like, it's about you all. What is the work that you do to keep listening, to be thoughtful? I mean, it's not easy to have that attention for young people all the time. And so what do you have to do as allies in order to stay thoughtful? So
That's great.
about that.
Want me to start? Yeah. Okay. I was actually just talking to Alicia a little bit before this, to quote you back. She said something that we're raising a generation of caretakers with young women. And if we think back, my mother was really involved in the women's movement, and how the women's movement started was these consciousness-raising circles, where women would get together and say, that's happening in your house, you're being expected to do all the cleaning, all the cooking, the work, this, and you're not being talked to respectfully, and what's happening. So I think partly it's having young women actually get a chance to talk about what's happening in their lives. A lot of them know what's going on. They're being asked to take care of their younger siblings. And if there's a boy in the house, the boy is not asked the same thing. They're being asked to do the dishes, to cook, to clean, to handle the caretaking of the family, and then do better in school and handle all these things. And I think if we get young women to actually talk to each other about what their lives are like and explain the concept of sexism, it's a really great concept. We came up with it for a reason. And talk to them about what it is, and then they're going to start feeling like they can have the conversations at home and take things on. And the keep listening. I mean, we need to be listened to in order to listen. And one of the things that we do around the social emotional learning work in our thing is that we have these every other week equal time listening groups for the young people, but we also have them for the staff. We do equal time listening with the staff. We do appreciations with the staff. We do all the work that we do with the young people, we also do with the staff. We need it. I don't know how I don't know if anybody here is a classroom teacher, ever has been, but I think every teacher, if you know a teacher, listen to them every day. Teachers need listened to every single day so they can go back into those classrooms. So.
I would also say affirmations for women and young men. Mine was kind of, I didn't think that I was going towards like the young men. I was generalizing it to like all of the youth that we encounter. But one thing that kind of organically happens in our program is somebody will, because we ask you to come as you are. If you are like somebody who believes that women should be in a kitchen, come to this program and let us school you. And let the women of this program school you. And so that's something that organically happens within our program. It's, my brother is actually in the program right now. Really happy about that. And he had a conversation with the men of the program about toxic masculinity. And he was like, what is this? And I was like, yes, this is perfect. Because he's going to college next year. So it's like, I think it's perfect timing. School your friends too. And it was just like a perfect timing because he had no idea that he was offending some of the young women in the program. Just because he would say like small things that were normalized. Where he's from, who he hangs out with. And so those young women, I think we've empowered them enough for them to be like, yo, that's not okay. I need you to take that back. Or we have this thing where we say, ouch, ouch, that hurt. Let's talk about it. Or have circles. Or, just don't talk to me for today. Because I need to, have a space away from you. And so I think giving them that opportunity to kind of call people out and not on like a negative, like, I'm going to beat you up. Like, it's like, I'm going to check you because somebody else will beat you up, And then for listening, self-care is like the realest thing. I have a really sound group of friends that are probably very sick of me at this point, but they haven't rejected me yet, so they listen to everything as I cook for them. That's how I trick them. And then I have an amazing partner that is kind of, I snatch up and make him work with me sometimes, and so he understands what I'm going through, and so that's a lot. But I would say there are also like circles on Mondays, I believe, at like Precious Blood, and so you can go there for like circle keepers, and they have like conversations just to kind of talk, because we have so many spaces for our youth to talk. We need to talk as well.
And I just want to say one other thing is that feelings are okay, and that I think people get worried when someone starts crying and we try to stop them. It's normal, it's natural, it feels better. Laughing, being mad, just like leave room for that for all ages.
So if everyone can please help me to thank these amazing panelists.